Most people believe manipulation looks obvious. A liar who talks too much, a bully who demands control, a villain who openly shows his intentions. That belief is comforting, but it is wrong. The most dangerous manipulators rarely raise their voice. They do not threaten you, and they do not openly try to control you. They appear calm, helpful, and reasonable. They look like people you trust. 500 years ago, Niccolo Machiavelli wrote something most people still refuse to accept. Men judge more by the eye than by the hand. In simple terms, people believe what they see. A smile, a favor, a calm voice. But behind that performance, influence is quietly tightening around you. Manipulation rarely arrives with force. It arrives dressed as kindness, and if you fail to recognize the signs early, you may slowly lose control of your decisions, your confidence, and eventually your freedom. The first sign someone is quietly manipulating you is that they make you feel like everything is your fault. A skilled manipulator does not attack your choices directly, because direct confrontation creates resistance. Instead, they reshape how you interpret events. Every disagreement becomes your misunderstanding, every problem becomes your mistake, and every conflict somehow traces back to your behavior. Notice how subtle this is. They do not accuse you aggressively. They say things like, "I'm just confused why you reacted that way," or "I thought you were more understanding than that," or "I guess I expected better from you." These statements sound calm, almost thoughtful, but their psychological effect is powerful. You begin reviewing your own actions again and again, searching for the flaw that caused the conflict. Slowly, your confidence weakens, and that is exactly the point. A manipulator understands a simple truth about human psychology. A person who doubts themselves becomes easier to control. Once you begin assuming you are the problem, the manipulator rarely needs to defend themselves again. Every conversation begins with you explaining yourself, and every apology quietly strengthens their influence. The second sign is excessive kindness at the beginning. Most people assume manipulation begins with hostility, but in reality, it often begins with generosity. The manipulator offers help before you even ask. They support your ideas, compliment your strengths, and show interest in your thoughts. You feel understood, appreciated, sometimes even admired. But this is rarely accidental. It is strategic. Machiavelli warned leaders about this exact tactic, because appearing virtuous often creates more power than simply being virtuous. People naturally trust those who treat them with kindness early. Once trust is established, influence becomes easier. Then the manipulator begins introducing small expectations. Nothing dramatic, just small adjustments. A favor here, a compromise there. Because they helped you before, refusing feels uncomfortable. You begin adjusting your behavior to maintain the relationship. This is where the shift occurs. What started as kindness slowly becomes obligation, and obligation quietly becomes control. The third sign is subtle isolation. A manipulator rarely tells you to abandon others directly because that would immediately raise suspicion. Instead, they plant quiet seeds of doubt about the people around you. A friend becomes unreliable, a colleague becomes jealous, a family member becomes negative. These comments appear casual and harmless, but over time they begin reshaping how you view others. Slowly, you begin withdrawing from people who once supported you. No one forced you to do it, yet your perception changed. Meanwhile, the manipulator positions themselves as the one person who truly understands you. As isolation grows, their influence becomes stronger, because fewer voices exist to challenge them. Machiavelli once observed that power often depends on controlling perception, and isolation accomplishes exactly that. When your world becomes smaller, the manipulator quietly becomes the center of it. The fourth sign is the strategic use of silence. Some manipulators do not argue at all. Instead, they simply withdraw. No explanation, no discussion, just silence. At first it feels confusing, then uncomfortable, and eventually it becomes emotionally painful. Human beings naturally seek resolution when tension appears in relationships, but silence blocks that resolution completely. So you begin working harder to restore peace. You reach out, you apologize, and you compromise even if you were not responsible for the conflict. This is psychological leverage. The manipulator does not need to force compliance because your discomfort begins doing the work for them. Once you start adjusting your behavior simply to avoid their silence, the relationship dynamic has changed. You are no longer acting freely, you are acting to prevent withdrawal. Silence becomes their quiet form of authority. If any of these signs feel familiar, pause for a moment and think carefully, because recognizing manipulation is not about paranoia. It is about awareness. The fifth sign is when someone begins redefining reality itself. One of the most powerful manipulation tactics involves altering how you remember events. A manipulator might calmly say, "That's not what happened," or "You're remembering it wrong," or "You're exaggerating again." At first, this seems like a simple disagreement about details, but when it happens repeatedly, something strange begins to occur. You stop trusting your memory. You begin questioning your interpretation of events. And once that happens, the manipulator gains an extraordinary advantage, because whoever controls the story controls the outcome. If they can redefine the past, they can shape the present. Machiavelli understood that control often depends on perception rather than truth. And when your perception becomes unstable, their version of reality quietly replaces yours. You begin accepting explanations that once seemed impossible, not because they presented evidence, but because your confidence in your own judgment has weakened. The sixth and final sign is that they always seem calm during conflict. Most people assume the calm person in an argument must be the reasonable one, but calmness can also be a strategy. A skilled manipulator understands that emotional reactions weaken credibility, so they remain composed while you become frustrated. Their voice stays steady, their tone remains controlled, and to anyone observing the situation, it begins to look very different. You appear emotional while they appear rational, but the emotional reaction did not appear from nowhere. It often developed from repeated pressure, confusion, and subtle accusations. The manipulator understands this dynamic perfectly. By staying calm while provoking your frustration, they quietly shift the narrative. You become the unstable one, and they become the victim. Once others see the situation this way, their influence becomes even stronger. In this context, calmness is not peace, it is positioning. Manipulation rarely begins with cruelty. It begins with subtle influence. A compliment that becomes obligation, a misunderstanding that becomes self-doubt, a moment of silence that becomes pressure. These tactics succeed because they do not feel like control in the beginning. They feel like ordinary relationships, but Machiavelli understood something many people still struggle to accept. Human behavior is often guided by strategy rather than sincerity, and the most effective manipulators do not force power, they design it quietly. Recognizing these 6 signs does not mean becoming suspicious of everyone around you. It means strengthening your awareness, because the moment you clearly see manipulation, its power begins to fade, and the control that was slowly slipping away returns to where it belongs, with you.